thank you all for joining today in the final session of Gibber Masson's Women in Investment Management seminar series. As you may know, across the seminar series, we've been discussing different issues such as the maternity penalty with Pregnant Then Screwed. Joanna Goodwin did a really good session on how to develop skills to future-proof your career. And today I'm really pleased to welcome Guinevere Taylor and Nondini Chakrabarti from RBC Asset Management, both directors from within distribution and business development. And Guinevere is also the co-chair of RBC's gender equality group as well. So today they'll be providing some thought-provoking insights into the truth about diversity, including the dark side of quotas and how to achieve cognitive diversity within teams. There'll be an opportunity to ask a lot of questions at the end of the presentation. But otherwise, yeah, thank you all for joining. And Nondini, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, perfect. Can everyone hear me okay? Is the sound coming in okay? Yeah? Okay, great.
I can hear you.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. It's a pleasure to be here. I think we're going to have some good discussion points on this topic of cognitive diversity and quotas, which we hear about so often in the news. So maybe what I can do is I can kick off with a little story. So what you have, or what you should have on your screen, is the Daily Telegraph crossword puzzle from the 13th of January, 1942. So at this time in 1942 was quite a tumultuous time, as you can imagine. The war was raging on, and there was a group called the Eccentric Club, and they had offered a prize of £100 to anyone who would be able to finish this crossword puzzle in 12 minutes or less. So the then editor of the Daily Telegraph, he opened up the newsroom on Fleet Street in London, and he invited competitors to come and try their hand at beating this crossword on January 12th, 1942, under controlled conditions. So one of the people who wanted to participate in this contest was this chap here, who's pictured. Now, his name is, or I guess probably was, Stanley Sedgwick. And he was a pretty ordinary guy. He was a clerk at an accounting firm and considered himself somewhat of a whiz with crossword puzzles, which he would do on a daily basis on his commute on the train. So on the day of the competition, when the bell rang after 12 minutes, there were 4 people who were able to finish the competition in the allotted time. Now, Stanley was actually not one of those people. He was one word shy of finishing it. However, the observers of the competition were very impressed with his creativity, his ingenuity, his lateral thinking when doing this puzzle. So the competitors had a nice afternoon and went on their merry way and thought that was a fun way to spend the day. Now, it wasn't until several weeks later that Stanley received a letter in the post marked confidential. And when he opened the letter, he was surprised to find that it was a request for him to report to Bletchley Park in order to meet with a team of men and women who were assembled to try and break Nazi codes and crack encryption devices, including the very famous Enigma machine, which you might have, if you have seen the movie The Imitation Game, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, it was a part of that movie. Under traditional thinking, if you were trying to recruit a team of elite code breakers, you'd probably want to stack that team full of mathematicians and computer scientists. But the head of the Bletchley Park operation, a guy by the name of Alistair Denniston, he had the important insight that in order to put together winning teams that are able to tackle complex and multidimensional problems, you'll need to put together teams of people who are able to think differently. They needed a guy like Stanley Sedgwick who was able to bring a different perspective, think differently as a champion puzzle solver. What you needed was a team of rebels and not clones. And this is what I've tried to illustrate here in a schematic way, that the best teams are made of people who don't necessarily just look differently, but who also think differently. And this is a concept that is outlined beautifully in a book called Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed. It's a book that I recommend for everyone. And Mr. Syed's main thesis is that when putting together teams and trying to build diversity, the objective should be to try and achieve cognitive diversity rather than diversity just for the sake of amassing a group of people who look differently. So with that, to go into a bit deeper, I'm going to pass it off to Gwyn.
Thank you. So as Nondini just pointed out, if you have that top right-hand corner group from her previous slide, you can have a group of very super intelligent people, but if all they do is agree with each other and think the same way, you aren't going to achieve much. And that's called because you have what's called group think. And after all, nobody wants to work in a group where you have a whole bunch of Mr. Smiths from the Matrix, all acting the same and believing the same things and doing everything that the other person does. What you need is diversity. And by diversity, I don't just mean a room of people who look different, as Nondini just said. It's all about having those different backgrounds and experiences to pull from that shape how you view the world. Now, this can be because somebody is either BAME, which is Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. They might be different genders. They might have different sexual orientations, come from a different class background or different religions. It all feeds into having a good mix of diversity, but most importantly are the experiences that the individual has had. As an example of this, I might look like any of your average asset managers that you might have spoken with before, but I'm half Fijian and grew up in a very working class town up in the north of England, which makes me think very differently to the way a lot of other people who say grew up in the home counties and went to a public school do. And to have an effective team, like I believe myself and Nondini have, I think you have to have a mix of these different outlooks and different experiences to have that true cognitive diversity and to have that good mix. But now, not all groupthink is intentional, and it can happen without even realizing it. You could have a genuinely diverse team who've been working together for a long time without turnover, but who start to assimilate each other and merge into one voice without even realizing it. So it's important to be aware of that and to just check in every now and then that different voices are being heard within your team. And on the next slide, a cautionary tale of this is Barclays. So nobody was willing to say no to Bob Diamond and just followed his lead. So it's really important to have challenging opinion and to value the challenge. And that's what cognitive diversity is all about. And that's where its true value lies. So this all goes into the issue of culture and inclusion, which we will come to a little bit later on. Now, Nondini highlighted one example of how true cognitive diversity was of benefit to a team. However, correlation does not always equal causation. So the greater diversity in a team or corporate leadership doesn't automatically translate into better performance or more profit. The correlation does indicate that when a company commits themselves to diverse leadership, they can be more successful. So some cases, there have been numerous studies about this since that reiterate the idea, such as the McKinsey study where diversity matters. Why diversity matters?
Can someone who's typing put their microphone off, please? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So the McKinsey study, so why diversity matters, that I'm sure a lot of people have already read, shows that companies in the top quartile for gender or racial and ethnic diversity are more likely to have financial returns above their national industry medians. And companies in the bottom quartiles in these dimensions are statistically less likely to achieve above average returns. And their most recent study, Delivering Through Diversity report, found that corporations that embrace gender diversity on their executive teams were more competitive and 21% more likely to experience above average profitability. They also had a 27% likelihood of outperforming their peers on longer term value creation. So different perspectives on customer needs, product improvements, and company well-being fuel a better business. And to go a little bit deeper on that, there were two similar studies that looked at returns of hedge fund sectors of different teams, and they showed that the teams that were either all female or mixed gender teams actually outperformed their all male counterparts as well, with the mixed teams being the most effective and getting the better returns. But quotas. So how do you get diversity? And as a race, change isn't something that we tend to be comfortable about. However, movements such as #MeToo and Black Lives Matter and the work of organisations such as the 30% Club and the Diversity Project have driven change, and organisations are now waking up and change is happening. So one thing that has driven change are quotas, such as the Women in Finance Charter. Now, this is a good thing as it's driving the change and making companies do things differently. It's far too easy for a hiring manager to continue doing the same thing, using the same job adverts and recruitment companies, meaning that they get the same type of candidate, and then just saying, oh, we didn't get any diverse people applying. But having quotas have made people look at things and do things differently. So they're writing job descriptions in a way that appeals to a wider audience. Because we've all heard of the Hewlett-Packard study that women only apply if they tick all the right skill set boxes. People have been using more specialist recruitment companies, and there's been the rise of things like returner programs to help experienced candidates get back to work after career gaps. But is it real diversity? Are you actually getting that cognitive diversity? That's the value there. People might look different, but they might have all gone to the same school and therefore not be diverse. Then it's that conformity and diversity issue. So true diversity is cognitive diversity. Like we've said, it's how you think. And like I said earlier, I'm half Fijian, and as such, I spent my very early years growing up in Fiji. And I believe that those earlier experiences really do help shape how people see the world and think in different ways. However, that wouldn't be highlighted by a quota tick box. And it's something that, that Nondini will talk about more in a moment. Now, the biggest danger of quotas is that you end up with the wrong people in roles just because they need to tick that box. And then that can be to the detriment of the diversity campaign. Inclusion is just as important as diversity. However, it's argued that without quotas, the change would be slower. So it seems that this is a bit of a necessary evil for now, and hopefully one that's going to help, but hopefully something that won't be needed in the long term. And with that, I'll pass back over to Nondini.
Thanks, Gwen. So maybe I'll dive into a bit more detail in some of those points that Gwen had mentioned with some examples. So again, to Gwen's point, quotas are often constructed based on things that are very easy to capture in a photograph, like gender and race and age. However, again, if the ultimate objective is to achieve that cognitive diversity, then it's important to remember that focusing only on demographic factors will not necessarily lead to cognitive diversity. So as an example, very simple example, let's take two pairings of economists. So pairing A, they would probably, pick the box on a traditional demographic matrix. You have a white middle-aged man and you have a young Black female. Now, let's assume that these two individuals went to the same university, studied under the same professors, left with the same economic models in their mind. They would effectively be clones of one another from a cognitive perspective and not be able to necessarily achieve something greater when they're paired together. Now, the two individuals on the right, they look effectively the same, two middle-aged white men, and they probably, most diversity matrices would say that these two individuals are homogenous. However, if one of them was a Keynesian economist and the other was a monetarist, then put together as a collaborative team, they would certainly think very differently. and their collective predictions over time would almost certainly be significantly better when combined. So this kind of underlines, this simple example kind of underlines the main limitation of quotas, that demographics does not necessarily lead to the creation of cognitively diverse teams. And just as maybe a final point on the dark side of quotas, again, to Gwen's point, sometimes they can be effective in jump-starting slow-moving organizations, or organizations that have had a very traditional way of thinking and need to modernize and come into the future. But I think that maybe one bit of advice is that if quotas are used, they cannot be lumping different people into one broad category. So for example, let's take visible minorities. It would be very easy for an employer to say that, in 5-10 years time, we will have the objective of ensuring that 40% of our senior executives are of a visible minority category. However, you need to look much more deeper into those subgroups. So, for example, in Britain, Bangladeshi Brits earn about 20% less on average than white people. However, those with an Indian heritage will be more likely to earn about 12% more on average. Black Britons, on average, earn 9% less than their white counterparts, but Britons who identify as Chinese actually earn 30% more. So what this shows is that employers aren't necessarily systematically discriminating against groups simply based on the color of their skin. But to look into the roots of that inequality, we have to look further, and that's a pretty arduous task. So one very interesting study that I saw in the UK was actually insights provided by UCAS, which is the UK University Admissions Service. And they have a lot of data on those people who are entering university, and they gather data on a bunch of different metrics. So this might be kind of surprising. I was very surprised when I read this, that the ethnic group that is least likely to go into higher education in the United Kingdom are actually white people. So of the white British people that do end up going to university, the majority of them are middle income, and 57% of them are female. The actual least likely subgroup of individuals who would go on to seek higher education are actually poor working class males, with only 13% attending university, which is less than any other Black or Asian group in the UK. In today's society, hardly anyone would garner any sort of sympathies if they were to create a quota to help poor white boys. Earlier this year, the BBC actually admitted that people from low or intermediate income households are hugely underrepresented in their workforce. However, the BBC did not set up quotas to help those individuals. Rather, they set up quotas to establish help for more traditional metrics like gender. So it brings up the question of whether positive action in the name of diversity is actually leaving certain groups that are believed to be privileged, like working class boys, and then we might be neglecting these groups. And that's a part of quotas that really needs to be considered. And companies need to see whether they're actually poorly designed and inadvertently helping these so-called privileged groups. So with a final point, I'm going to pass it off to Gwen.
Thank you. So on this slide, I just wanted to show that diversity, it gives you the pieces of the puzzle, but it's inclusion that joins those pieces together. If a diverse person is added to a team where they don't feel valued or able to speak their mind freely, then their cognitive diversity will not be realized. You're effectively inviting them to come to dinner, but not giving them a seat at the table. And the reasons for this are that people state are microaggressions and unconscious bias that can make people feel very undervalued in the workplace. Unfairness and mistreatment are actually key reasons cited for resignations among the BAME female candidates where a study was done showing why they actually leave the workforce. So this is a cultural issue. In the same way that you can have the most amazing HR policies in place designed to foster a diverse and inclusive environment, such as maybe having great maternity or paternity packages, flexible working, etc. If people aren't encouraged to take them and role models aren't visible, then that inclusive environment isn't likely to come to fruition. And that can impact on the performance of a company as well. And there's been numerous studies to show that. But the more diverse a company is, it tends to invest more in its R&D, which means that they can have lower staff turnover rates as well. So and high turnover can be expensive and hit on profits and also reputational risk. What we need to do is to ensure that the tone from the top is one that speaks about allowing those little voices to be heard and valued. So you need to have, I think it's important to have visible leaders speaking and leading on this issue within organisations to ensure that those values flow down throughout an organisation and that there's a culture where people can be their authentic selves. And that goes about everything. So it's not just about having a mix, like we've said, of a tick box quota mix. It's about making sure that you actually have that cognitive diversity, and then that cognitive diversity is valued. Because whilst diversity is about numbers, inclusion is about making sure that those numbers count. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gwyn and Nondini. So let's open up to some questions, and I can start off with one first of all. Just on what you were saying about quotas, is there anything in particular that RBC have promoted to challenge those quotas? Have you got sort of any advice to other employers?
Gwyn, did you want to kick off on that one?
Yeah, so I think within RBC, so we do have certain quotas there around recruitment and around targets for interviews. Mm-hmm. But I think the biggest thing that we try to do is to just encourage that inclusive culture, so that we don't actually need to have the quotas in place in the future. Mm-hmm. So we have loads of employee resource groups so that people can feel valued, such as Our Women. We have other groups as well called Our Pride, mm-hmm. Our Mia, where we try and foster that culture where people can feel that they are valued and that they are included in the workplace as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think also it's you see it very clearly in the team. The managers, the way that managers lead their teams, it's one where collaborative thinking and not being afraid to express your opinions in a constructive manner is something that is very fostered. So it's it's the top level committees and sort of structural type things, as well as it's something that is really encouraged on a team-based level as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, to add to that, I'd say that one of the things that we do, which I think is really great, is in meetings, it's not just about the loudest voice being heard. So you can, if you want to go to if you're going to a team meeting and you want to ask a certain question, you could always email that question ahead in advance. Or some of our rooms have whiteboards where you can write the question on there in advance as well, which allows people, the way that different people want to interact to be facilitated as well.
Excellent, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I've got one. First of all, thank you very much, both of you, for your comments today. Actually, my question's in relation to something that you mentioned right at the end there, about microaggressions and not being treated perhaps as fairly, resulting in people leaving jobs. Yes, that's absolutely happened to me. So it's quite nice to kind of hear that it's not something that's happened only to me. My question is kind of how you deal with that. So, I have found time and time again, I have been invited for dinner, but then perhaps haven't really been allowed to be authentic. You offer up kind of differing opinions, you disagree with that status quo, and you're often told things such as, unfortunately, HR has said to me in the past things like, maybe you need to agree with your manager more because you need to get them on your side first. How do you, yeah, many other comments, but how do you deal with something like that? When you are addressing it, but perhaps the organization itself isn't doing anything. Is there something that can be done? Are there external things that can be brought in, or is there sometimes a point where you just have to kind of say, do you know what, this isn't for me, maybe I'll move to an organization where you're more valued?
I guess for me, I'm not the type of person who likes to ever give up on something like that. So I would say try and I would always say to speak to HR first. One of the things that we try and do and encourage at RBC that I think works well is that we have mandatory diversity training for all employees. So everybody has to go through this training when they first join within I think it's the first 6 months, but it's ideally within the first couple of months when you join, and it's to talk about the importance of diversity and the importance of respecting differences as well. I think it's something really that should be taught at school rather than just when you go into a workplace, because I think that realizing that and respecting that and being told that that is the way that we want to do business is the right way to go forward, that you're cognizant of what other people's experiences, other people's differences and other people's values, and that's how that we're expected to work in a workplace as well. Now I know that that's something you can't join a new workplace and just say I think everybody has to have diversity training so that everybody can respect each other, but I think when a company starts to realize the value of diversity, I think we're going to see that more and more, and I hope that's something that does get rolled out more and more.
And Paris, maybe if I could add to that as well. Thanks for your question, by the way. I think that one thing that I've learned in my career so far is I have been in a similar situation back when I was still in Canada, and one thing that I've learned is that as I go in looking through different companies of where companies that I'd like to be a part of as an employee, the number one question that I always ask is, what is your culture like? I mean, like you could not pay me enough money to join some companies that I know that just have very toxic cultures. It's just because unfortunately, to your point, like there is a time where the only solution for your own mental sanity might unfortunately be to just have to leave the organization and start up somewhere else. But I think maybe that's kind of just what I would say is that culture is and what a company accepts and what they see as tolerable is probably one of the most important things, I think, when choosing the right employer.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned that it's mandatory diversity training for all employees at RBC. Is that an internal diversity training, or do you bring an external body in to help with that process?
Yeah, they bring in external people who do that training and roll that out. I think they're actually revising it at the moment because they want to include just update it with current affairs and current initiatives that have been going on. But it's an external company. I'll try and find out the name if you'd like.
That would be wonderful, please. Yes, thank you.
Thank you guys so much for the presentation. I think actually you've brought up some really interesting stats and observations, and done a good job in explaining some of the complexities and difficulties in building workforces that are genuinely cognitively diverse, and also as a result of that, potentially some of the unintended consequences. My question really is, when you're looking at through your hiring policies and trying to think about building diverse teams, how do you go about evaluating and trying to understand that, going beneath the surface and understanding whether someone would be additive from a cognitive perspective?
Yeah, that's something that Gwyn and I actually were just discussing this morning. Thanks, Jamie, for that. It's hard. This is not an easy thing to achieve. Particularly when you look at traditional hiring practices. You might get 30 to 60 minutes in the room with the reporting, the hiring manager, and maybe a few other people. It's very difficult to really think about how someone is going to think and whether they're going to be additive and different to your team. So I think that maybe there might be some changes necessarily, in traditional hiring practices. Gwen and I were talking about, the personality tests like Myers-Briggs. There's tons out there to see how someone thinks. And I was telling her that, again, I've been working now for 13 or 14 years. With all of the companies that I have ever interviewed, either in Canada or the UK, I have only been asked once to do a personality test. And I think it's kind of bizarre that more companies don't necessarily employ this method. I think it would be something really interesting to add. I mean, in addition to that, like when your team is assembled, I think it's important for managers to really try and promote and bring out that cognitive diversity. So, think about, how do you like to solve problems? How does my team like to solve problems? Is there anyone who's sitting quiet in a meeting room whose perspectives we're not, accepting or thinking about? Trying to design collaborative processes that might be able to try and engage, the people on the team who might not have the loudest voice. So I think that it's a combination of maybe thinking about hiring individuals a little bit differently, and also it's down to the teams themselves to really try and promote and get the best out of the team members.
Great, thank you very much. There's some interesting points there.
No problem. Thank you.
Gwyn, I've got a question for you. So you've been nominated for a Women in Investment Award. Would you like to see award ceremonies like this sort of change its title, its focus? Do you think that would have an impact on the industry?
Yeah, I think whilst these awards are great at the moment for role modelling talent and role modelling people to younger talent, so that they can actually see that someone like them can actually do well in this industry, and that they can do well as well. I think they're really important for that. However, in 5 years' time, I don't want to see any sort of, even though they're positive discrimination, I don't want to see any awards that differentiate in that way. I'm hoping that, say, in 5 years' time, we just have investment awards and it's everybody equal, because that's the big goal, is that we don't need them anymore. But at the moment, I think they are useful for role modelling and also giving people access to, say, sponsors and mentors as well that they can relate to.
Thank you very much. I've got a question here to read out in the comments box in a moment. While that's coming through, has anyone else got any other questions? Oh. Let's have a look. I just have to find that. I'm just waiting for that to come through.
I'll ask another question in the meantime. Just out of curiosity, can you perhaps tell us a little bit about some of the potential grassroots kind of diversity elements that you have? So whether it might be, reaching out to people at schools, universities, whether it's anything to do with returners, what are the kind of on the ground kind of bits and bobs, things that you've actually changed to really ensure you have a diverse and then eventually an inclusive work environment as well?
Yeah, I think this is thank you for that question. this is something that I think is really important, and it's something that we do actually take quite seriously as well at RBC. So we have in 2017 we launched a program called Our Launch, which is focused on returners. So it's to get people, both men and women, who've had a gap out of their career for any reason, either say to care for a loved one or for a long term, they went off on maternity leave and stayed off for say 5 or 6 years. So it's to get those experienced individuals back into work, so they can come in, they apply for the program, and then they do a rotation around the bank, and then they decide where they want to go, and then they can apply for a role if there's a role open in those certain departments, and they can go in at the level that they left, because I think it can be quite difficult sometimes as a returner. You've reached a high level, you're say a director of a company, and then you can, because you've had a gap, people are only wanting you to do say a junior role that you're overqualified for, because they think that you've lacked that time out of the business, whereas that doesn't really mean anything these days. And the rotation program really helps get people's confidence back and get their knowledge back as well. And then we also have an RBC Academy, where we go out to schools and talk to schools, and then they can do the individuals can do internships, summer internships or internships within the organization as well, and we talk to them about different parts of the industry and try and help them through interviews and etc. And then we also we've just actually signed up for 100 Black interns as well. So we'll be taking on a Black intern. I think it's going to be next year. Well, it will be next year now. For I think it's a 6-week period over the summer, where they'll come in and work within the organisation and get that experience, and then hopefully maybe they'll apply for the graduate program next year as well. So there are a few of the initiatives that we have to try and encourage more diverse talent into the organisation.
And maybe just to add to that as well, this obviously isn't relevant necessarily from the UK perspective, but RBC in Canada, obviously as you know, is just a massive machine, huge employer in Canada. And one initiative that I think that is great that they do is that they do focus on, for the number of rotation programs that they have, they do focus on hiring from different types of universities. So not just the prime universities in Canada, but also the mid-tier unis, the smaller colleges, trying to find people who, it's not that they're any less ambitious or any less intelligent, but they just might not have been able to afford to go to the top tier universities. And I think that this helps to diversify the pipeline of people who come into the school as well, and offer a different perspective.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Charlotte, did that question come through on the comments?
Apologies, my chat seems to have disappeared. No, it hasn't come through. Apologies to that individual, and I don't want to click off anything. It will relaunch it in case it closes down the whole thing. So apologies, but no, one sort of final question for me then. As we've discussed, cognitive diversity does tend to get a lot less attention than identity diversity, for example. What would you both like to see happen and change?
From my perspective, kind of in line with what Gwyn was saying, is that I would love for this, to sort of be phased out, where people are, that teams and companies are rather respecting people for the way that they think versus their demographic factors. I do have a concern that in a lot of companies, the more that they try to push diversity in demographic and identity diversity, the more it becomes a thing, like it becomes like a topic. And what really frustrates me, and what breaks my heart rather as well, is is someone like myself. I'm an Asian, I'm a female. If I were to get promoted in a role, I would never want someone to look at me and be like, oh, Nondini got that because she's Indian and a female. I would want someone to look at me and say, she got that because she deserves it and she worked for it. So I think that these are sort of the when diversity campaigns and policies are really shoved into people's faces, I think that it has these negative byproducts that can develop. And I'd love to see in the future that it's, you know, we don't need to be as forceful or need to be as intentional with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it can. I think you're 100% right there, because I think if you're focusing on one certain demographic as well, I think other demographics or minority groups or genders, etc., can get frustrated about it. I've done these talks before to like trustee boards, and as soon as you mention the word diversity, and I'll be standing in a room which is full of very like older white men, and as soon as you mention diversity, their eyes roll because they're like, oh God, here we go, we're going to be shamed again. And I do feel for certain people, because they can't help that they're an older white man and they feel as though they're being victimized by this diversity campaign in a way as well, because they've been in the industry for so long and they've got that experience, they're at a certain level, and then we're coming in and saying that you need to look at things differently, and they're like, oh, like we just feel like it's just constantly this drum being banged on about, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be that diversity is a benefit to everybody, and that like we've said, that it's not just about what you look like, it's bring to the table, and it's about that value and that product that the productivity that you're actually bringing, and those different thoughts that you're bringing to the company, and that should be the value, and that should be the value add. So I'm just hoping that we get to a point where we don't even need to talk about it, and that we can just all be.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any final questions? All good. Well, thank you so much, both of you. That was, yeah, really interesting, and obviously some really important you know, points made there, so lots to take away. So yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time in that presentation today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And if anybody does have any other questions they want to ask via LinkedIn or anything, then just feel free to reach out. Thank you.